The question of whether to drill for oil in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge has been an ongoing political controversy in the United States since 1977. As of 2017, Republicans have attempted to allow drilling in ANWR almost 50 times, finally being successful with the passage of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. ANWR comprises 19 million acres of the North Alaskan coast. The land is situated between the Beaufort Sea to the north, Brooks Range to the south, and Prudhoe Bay to the west. It is the largest protected wilderness in the United States and was created by Congress under the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act of 1980. Section 1002 of that act deferred a decision on the management of oil and gas exploration and development of 1.5 million acres in the coastal plain, known as the 1002 area. The controversy surrounds drilling for oil in this subsection of ANWR. Much of the debate over whether to drill in the 1002 area of ANWR rests on the amount of economically recoverable oil, as it relates to world oil markets, weighed against the potential harm oil exploration might have upon the natural wildlife, in particular the calving ground of the porcupine caribou. In their documentary Being Caribou, the porcupine herd was followed in its yearly migration by author and wildlife biologist Karsten Hoyer and filmmaker Leanne Allison to provide a broader understanding of what is at stake if the oil drilling should happen and educating the public. There has been controversy over the scientific report's methodology and transparency of information during the Trump administration, although there have been complaints from employees within the Department of the Interior. The reports remain the central evidence for those who argue that the drilling operation will not have a detrimental impact on local wildlife. On December 3, 2020, the Bureau of Land Management gave notice of sale for the Coastal Plain Oil and Gas Leasing Program in the ANWR, with a live stream video drilling rights lease sale scheduled for January 6, 2021. The Trump administration issued the first leases on January 19, 2021. On President Joe Biden's first day in office, he issued an executive order for a temporary moratorium on drilling activity in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. On June 1, 2021, Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland suspended all Trump-era oil and gas leases in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge pending a review of how fossil fuel drilling would impact the remote landscape. Before Alaska was granted statehood on January 3, 1959, virtually all 375 million acres of the territory of Alaska was federal land and wilderness. The act granting statehood gave Alaska the right to select 103 million acres for use as an economic and tax base. In 1966, Alaska Natives protested a federal oil and gas lease sale of lands on the North Slope claimed by Natives. Late that year, Secretary of the Interior Stuart Udall ordered the lease sale suspended. Shortly thereafter announced a freeze on the disposition of all federal land in Alaska, pending congressional settlement of native land claims. These claims were settled in 1971 by the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, which granted them 44 million acres. The act also froze development on federal lands, pending a final selection of parks, monuments, and refuges. The law was set to expire in 1978. Toward the end of 1976, with the Trans-Alaska Pipeline system virtually complete, major conservation groups shifted their attention to how best to protect the hundreds of millions of acres of Alaskan wilderness unaffected by the pipeline. On May 16, 1979, the United States House of Representatives approved a conservationist-backed bill that would have protected more than 125 million acres of federal lands in Alaska, including the calving ground of the nation's largest caribou herd, backed by President Jimmy Carter, and sponsored by Morris K. Udall and John B. Anderson. The bill would have prohibited all commercial activity in 67 million acres designated as wilderness areas. The U.S. Senate had opposed similar legislation in the past and filibusters were threatened. On December 2, 1980, Carter signed into law the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act, which created more than 104 million acres of national parks, wildlife refuges, and wilderness areas from federal holdings in that state. The bill allowed drilling in ANWR, but not without Congress's approval and the completion of an environmental impact study. Both sides of the controversy announced they would attempt to change it in the next session of Congress. Section 1002 of the Act stated that a comprehensive inventory of fish and wildlife resources would be conducted on 1.5 million acres of the Arctic Refuge coastal plain. Potential petroleum reserves in the 1002 area were to be evaluated from surface geological studies and seismic exploration surveys. No exploratory drilling was allowed. These studies and recommendations for F.